The last dinner of my marriage tasted like cold regret. As I pushed open the heavy glass door of the restaurant, a familiar scent instantly filled the air. Peppercorn steak, the same dish Leo had ordered on the night he proposed to me 8 years ago. Back then, I had believed I was walking into a future filled with love, loyalty, and growing old together. Today, I was walking into the end of that dream. The restaurant looked almost unchanged. The soft golden light still reflected off the polished wooden floors, and the same corner table where Leo had once slipped a diamond ring onto my finger had been reserved once again. But everything felt different. The warmth was gone. The excitement was gone. All that remained was a painful silence hanging in the air between two people who had become strangers. Leo arrived 15 minutes late. Years ago, he would have rushed in apologizing, worried that he had kept me waiting. Now he barely looked at me. His eyes were glued to his phone as he sat down across from me. A faint smile occasionally appeared on his lips whenever a message popped onto the screen. I didn't need to ask who he was texting. Noelle, his 24-year-old secretary. The woman who had slowly invaded our marriage until there was nothing left to save. The waiter placed our meals on the table. The steak sizzled loudly, but neither of us spoke. I watched Leo scroll through his phone while mechanically cutting his food. It was hard to believe this was the same man who used to hold my hand across restaurant tables and tell me he couldn't imagine a future without me. For years, I had tried to save our marriage. I ignored the late nights at the office. I ignored the growing distance. I ignored the way his affection slowly disappeared. Every time I questioned him, he always had an excuse. Work was stressful. Clients were demanding. He was tired. And because I loved him, I chose to believe him. Until the night everything shattered. I still remembered sitting alone in our living room while Leo was supposedly working late. His phone buzzed on the coffee table after he had rushed into the shower. Normally, I would never look. Trust had always been the foundation of our relationship. But something felt wrong. The screen lit up. A message from Noelle. A heart emoji. Then another message. I miss you already. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled as I opened the conversation. What I found destroyed 8 years of marriage in less than 5 minutes. Hundreds of messages. Secret dinners. Hotel reservations. Photographs. Promises about a future together. And worst of all, conversations mocking me behind my back. That night, the woman I had been disappeared forever. The following months were a nightmare of arguments, tears, and unanswered questions. Leo barely tried to deny anything. In fact, he almost seemed relieved that the truth had finally come out. The man who once swore to protect my heart had already given it away to someone else. As I sat across from him now, watching him smile at Noelle's messages during our final dinner, I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not sadness. Relief. The pain had already done its damage. The tears had already been cried. The love had already died. When the paperwork is finalized, I'm leaving Chicago, I said quietly. For the first time that evening, Leo looked up. Leaving, he asked. My grandmother left me a cottage in Oregon. I'm moving there. His reaction told me everything. No concern. No hesitation. No attempt to stop me. Just a careless shrug. Probably for the best, he said. Noel and I have enough to focus on with the wedding. The wedding. Hearing those words should have broken me. Instead, I felt strangely free. Because at that moment, I finally understood something important. I wasn't losing my husband. I had lost him a long time ago. This dinner wasn't the end of my marriage. It was simply the final goodbye to a man who no longer existed. As I stared across the table, I searched for the person I had fallen in love with all those years ago. He wasn't there. Only a stranger remained. And for the first time in 8 years, I realized I didn't love him anymore. Leaving Chicago felt like stepping out of a storm that had raged for years. The days following my divorce passed in a blur of cardboard boxes, packing tape, and memories I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Every room in the condo carried traces of a life I had once believed would last forever. The cream-colored couch Leo and I had argued over before buying. The framed photographs that had once lined the hallway walls. The coffee mugs we collected during vacations. Each item seemed to whisper stories from a marriage that no longer existed. I packed only what truly belonged to me. Clothes, books, a few personal keepsakes, and a small wooden box filled with photographs from happier times. I considered throwing it away more than once, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Those memories were part of who I had been. I didn't want to erase them. I simply wanted to leave them behind. The hardest goodbye wasn't the apartment. It was Maddie. My best friend had been my lifeline through the darkest chapter of my life. She had listened to every tearful phone call, every late-night breakdown, every moment when I questioned my worth after Leo's betrayal. The day before my departure, she met me at Union Station. The giant train terminal buzzed with travelers rushing in every direction, but for a few moments it felt like the world had slowed down around us. Maddie wrapped me in a fierce hug. "So this is really happening," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded. "It's time." She tried to smile, but her eyes were already shining with tears. "You know you can always come back." "I know. And if anyone out there gives you trouble, I'll fly to Oregon and personally deal with them." I laughed for the first time in days. That sounds exactly like something you would do. Before we boarded, she shoved a large canvas tote bag into my hands. Inside were my favorite coffee beans, homemade cookies, several handwritten notes, and enough snacks to survive a small apocalypse. "Emergency supplies," she declared. I shook my head, smiling through my tears. "You really are impossible. That's why you love me." When the final boarding announcement echoed through the station, we hugged one last time. Neither of us wanted to let go. But eventually we did. As I stepped onto the train, I realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't running away from something. I was moving towards something. The journey across the country took several days. At first, I spent most of my time staring out the window, watching Chicago slowly disappear behind me. The endless rows of buildings gave way to rolling farmland. The farmland turned into vast open plains. Then came mountains, forests, rivers, and landscapes, so breathtaking they hardly seemed real. Every mile placed more distance between me and the life I had left behind. Every sunrise felt like a promise. Every sunset felt like closure. Somewhere along the journey, I stopped checking my phone. I stopped wondering what Leo was doing. For the first time in a very long time, my thoughts belonged entirely to me. When the train finally crossed into Oregon, I pressed my forehead against the glass. The scenery looked nothing like Chicago. Towering pine trees stretched toward the sky. Crystal clear rivers wound through green valleys. The air seemed cleaner even from inside the train. Everything felt calmer, softer, almost magical. By the time I arrived at the station, excitement had replaced fear. I collected my luggage and stepped outside into the cool Pacific Northwest air. A local taxi driver helped load my suitcases into the trunk. "First time in Oregon?" he asked with a friendly smile. "Not exactly," I replied. "My grandmother lived here when I was young." "Coming back home then?" I thought about that for a moment. Home. It had been a long time since that word meant anything to me. "Yes," I finally answered. "I think I am." The drive to Oak Haven was beautiful. The highway gradually disappeared behind us as we followed winding coastal roads lined with towering evergreens. Small towns appeared and vanished along the route. Wooden houses sat nestled among hills covered in wildflowers. I rolled down the window. The air smelled like pine trees, ocean salt, and rain-soaked earth. It was unlike anything I had experienced in years. Eventually, the taxi turned onto a quiet road shaded by ancient oak trees. My heart began pounding. I recognized it immediately. The old stone fence, the blue wooden gate, the narrow path leading toward the house. My grandmother's house. The cottage appeared exactly as I remembered. A beautiful two-story craftsman home surrounded by an explosion of flowers. For several moments, I simply stood there, unable to move, unable to speak. Climbing roses wrapped around white trellises. Massive hydrangea bushes bloomed in shades of blue and violet. Lavender swayed gently in the breeze. An apple tree stood proudly near the garden wall, its branches heavy with fruit. The entire property felt alive, loved, protected. I slowly walked through the garden. Every corner carried memories. I remembered helping my grandmother water the flowers during summer vacations. I remembered sitting beside her on the porch while she told stories about life, love, and resilience. I remembered how safe I always felt here. Back then, I had been too young to understand why she loved this place so much. Now I finally did. This wasn't just a house. It was a sanctuary. A place where broken hearts could heal. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of cedarwood instantly greeted me. Sunlight streamed through large windows, painting golden patterns across the hardwood floors. Everything was warm, comfortable, peaceful. Nothing like the cold emptiness I had left behind in Chicago. I walked from room to room, touching furniture, opening windows, breathing in the quiet. For the first time since my marriage ended, I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel betrayed. I didn't feel lost. I felt hopeful. That evening, I stood on the second-floor balcony overlooking the garden as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the distant coastline. The sky turned shades of gold, pink, and deep purple. A cool breeze carried the scent of roses through the air. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. The pain wasn't gone. The memories weren't gone. But they no longer controlled me. My life had been shattered. And yet somehow standing there in my grandmother's garden, I realized that something beautiful was beginning to grow from the ruins. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a brand new chapter. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what came next. The first few weeks in Oakhaven felt like a gentle awakening after years spent trapped in a storm. Every morning I woke up to the sound of birds singing outside my bedroom window instead of the blaring alarm clocks and traffic noise that had defined my life in Chicago. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting warm golden patterns across the hardwood floor. For the first time in years, I felt no pressure to rush through my mornings. There were no arguments waiting for me. No cold silences. No constant anxiety about whether my marriage was falling apart. There was only peace. I threw myself into restoring my grandmother's cottage. The house was beautiful, but it needed a personal touch. I spent days repainting rooms, rearranging furniture, and bringing life back into forgotten corners. Every project reminded me why I had fallen in love with interior design in the first place. Choosing colors, textures, and layouts wasn't just work to me, it was art. It was a way of creating comfort, beauty, and meaning from empty spaces. As I worked, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Excitement. Not excitement about a relationship or someone else's dreams. Excitement about my own future. Once the house felt like home, I turned my attention toward finding work. Although my grandmother's inheritance provided financial security, I had no desire to spend my days doing nothing. I had worked hard to earn my master's degree in interior design, and despite everything that had happened in Chicago, I still loved my profession. I updated my resume, organized my portfolio, and began researching local design firms. Most opportunities were located in larger cities, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice the peaceful life I had finally found. I wanted a career that allowed me to stay in Oakhaven, close to the ocean, the forests, and the home that had already begun healing my broken heart. A few days later, I came across a boutique design studio called Foreman & Soul. The company wasn't large, but its reputation was outstanding. Their projects focused on environmentally conscious architecture and luxury hospitality design, exactly the kind of work I loved. I submitted my application and tried not to get my hopes up. 3 days later, my phone rang. They wanted to interview me. The morning of the interview, I stood in front of the mirror feeling surprisingly nervous. I chose a tailored navy blazer, a simple white blouse, and just enough makeup to look professional. As I drove through Oakhaven toward the studio, my stomach fluttered with uncertainty. This wasn't just a job interview. It felt like an audition for my new life. The studio itself was charming. Nestled between flowering trees and historic brick buildings, it felt more like an artist's workshop than a corporate office. Inside, sunlight filled the open workspace where sketches, material samples, and architectural models covered large wooden tables. I instantly felt at home. A few moments later, I met Matt Foreman. The owner of the firm looked nothing like the executives I had worked with in Chicago. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit or trying to impress anyone. Instead, he greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Arya," he said. His calm demeanor immediately put me at ease. The interview began with the usual questions about education and experience, but it quickly evolved into something much more interesting. Matt carefully reviewed my portfolio, stopping frequently to ask questions about my design choices and creative process. The longer we talked, the more animated the conversation became. For nearly an hour, we discussed architecture, sustainability, hospitality, design, and the emotional impact that beautiful spaces can have on people. When Matt reached the final page of my portfolio, he looked up and smiled. "I have to be honest," he said. "This is some of the most thoughtful work I've seen in years." I felt my cheeks warm. "Thank you." He leaned back in his chair. "With your experience, you could work for almost any major design firm in the country. Why choose a small town like Oakhaven?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I spent too many years chasing success while ignoring happiness," I said honestly. "I want both. I want meaningful work, but I also want a life outside the office. I want to build things I'm proud of while still having time to enjoy the people and places I love." For a moment, Matt simply stared at me. Then he nodded. "I think you're exactly what this company needs." The next morning, my phone rang again. I had barely finished pouring my coffee when I saw Matt's name on the screen. "Arya," he said. "If you're still interested, we'd love to have you join the team." I nearly dropped my mug. "Absolutely," I replied, unable to hide my excitement. By the following Monday, I officially became part of Foreman & Soul. My new coworkers welcomed me immediately. There were only a handful of employees, but the atmosphere felt more like a family than a workplace. Everyone was supportive, collaborative, and genuinely passionate about design. There were no office politics, no endless competition, and no toxic personalities constantly trying to climb over one another. For the first time in my professional life, I felt respected. Within my first month, the company secured a major project, an eco-luxury lodge nestled deep within Oregon's coastal forests. The project was ambitious. It required balancing modern luxury with environmental responsibility, while creating an experience that felt authentic to the surrounding landscape. Matt placed me in charge of much of the interior design work. The trust he showed me was both exciting and terrifying. At first, I questioned myself constantly. Was I talented enough? Was I making the right decisions? Could I really lead such an important project? But as the weeks passed, my confidence slowly returned. Every successful presentation, every approved concept, every compliment from a client, each one repaired a small piece of the self-belief I had lost during my marriage. For years, Leo had made me feel invisible. My accomplishments had always been secondary to his. My ambitions had always been treated as hobbies rather than achievements. Now, surrounded by people who valued my ideas, I finally began seeing myself differently. I wasn't someone's neglected wife. I wasn't someone's backup plan. I was talented, capable, independent, and successful. Outside of work, life continued to blossom. In the evenings, I tended to my grandmother's garden, carefully pruning roses and planting new flowers. On weekends, I rode my bicycle along the coastline, explored hidden hiking trails, and spent quiet afternoons reading books on the porch while listening to the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. The simple routines became sacred. Every day brought a little more healing. Every accomplishment brought a little more confidence. Every sunrise reminded me that life was still full of possibilities. One evening, after finalizing a major presentation for the Eco Lodge project, I stood in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The roses swayed gently in the breeze. The air smelled of lavender and salt water. And for the first time since my divorce, I realized something extraordinary. I wasn't merely surviving anymore. I was thriving. The woman who had arrived in Oregon carrying heartbreak, disappointment, and uncertainty was slowly disappearing. In her place stood someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who no longer needed another person to define her worth. For years, I thought losing my marriage meant losing my future. Standing there among the flowers, I finally understood the truth. Sometimes losing the wrong life is the only way to find the right one. As autumn settled over Oak Haven, life began moving forward in ways I never thought possible. The Eco Lodge project was progressing beautifully, my garden was thriving, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. The constant ache that had once followed me everywhere was slowly fading into a distant memory. My days were filled with work I loved, people who appreciated me, and quiet moments that brought me peace. Meanwhile, nearly 2,000 miles away in Chicago, Leo and Noelle were preparing for what they proudly called the wedding of the century. I only knew about it because of Maddie. If it had been up to me, I would have remained blissfully unaware. But Maddie considered herself my unofficial intelligence agency. Every few days, she would call with dramatic updates she had gathered from mutual friends, social media posts, and endless local gossip. One Friday evening, my phone buzzed while I was trimming rose bushes in the garden. I answered and immediately heard Maddie's exasperated sigh. "Oh my God, Arya. You are never going to believe how ridiculous this wedding has become." I laughed. "Do I want to know?" "No. But I'm telling you anyway." I could practically hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. Apparently, Noelle had made it her personal mission to ensure every person in Chicago knew she was marrying Leo. Her social media accounts had transformed into a non-stop wedding advertisement. Every day brought new photos, new announcements, new displays of luxury, new reasons for people to talk. According to Maddie, Noelle seemed less interested in marriage and more interested in creating a spectacle. The venue alone had become the talk of the city. Crystal Plaza, one of Chicago's most exclusive event locations. The Grand Ballroom was famous for hosting celebrity weddings, political galas, and high-profile charity events. Renting the space for a single evening cost more than many families earned in an entire year. Yet Noelle insisted on booking the largest ballroom available. Not because she needed the space, because she wanted everyone to know she could. Or at least she wanted everyone to think she could. "The place is enormous," Maddie explained. My husband saw photos from one of the vendors. Crystal chandeliers everywhere, imported flowers, giant ice sculptures. It's completely insane. I shook my head. It sounded exhausting. Back in Chicago, however, people seemed fascinated by the extravagance. The guest list continued to grow. Business executives, influencers, real estate developers, lawyers, investors. Anyone with social status was apparently invited. The wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a performance. An opportunity for Leo and Noel to present themselves as the city's newest power couple. And Leo seemed determined to enjoy every second of it. According to mutual acquaintances, he walked around with an air of smug satisfaction, constantly bragging about the upcoming ceremony. He loved talking about the guest list, the venue, the decorations, the honeymoon. Anything that reinforced the image of success he desperately wanted the world to see. To outsiders, he appeared to have everything. A beautiful young bride, a child on the way, a prestigious career, a glamorous future. At least that was the story he wanted everyone to believe. Noelle was no different. If anything, she was worse. Every update Maddie shared painted the same picture. Noelle constantly posted photos of luxury purchases, expensive jewelry, and wedding preparations. She spoke about the ceremony as if she were preparing for a royal coronation rather than a marriage. The centerpiece of her obsession was the wedding dress, a custom Vera Wang gown. According to rumors, it cost tens of thousands of dollars. The dress was covered in intricate hand-sewn crystals designed to sparkle beneath the ballroom lights. Noelle reportedly spent hours discussing the gown with anyone willing to listen. She wanted perfection. She wanted admiration. Most importantly, she wanted attention. And she intended to get it. The entertainment budget was equally outrageous. Instead of hiring a traditional wedding band, the couple booked an entire symphony orchestra. Dozens of musicians would perform throughout the evening. Classical music during dinner. Contemporary arrangements during the reception. A grand entrance worthy of a Hollywood awards show. Every detail screamed the same message. Look at us. Look how successful we are. Look how important we are. Yet beneath all, the glamour whispers had already begun circulating. Not everyone was impressed. Many guests privately questioned the speed of Leo and Noelle's relationship. Others wondered how Leo could afford such an expensive event. A few openly criticized Noelle's constant need for attention. The louder the wedding became, the more people talked. And not always in the way the couple hoped. One evening, Maddie called again while I was relaxing on my porch with a book. "You know what's funny?" she asked. "What?" "The more they show off, the more people are gossiping." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Everything. The affair. The pregnancy. The wedding costs. The fact that Leo divorced you and married her almost immediately. People are starting to connect the dots." I remained silent. For a long moment, all I could hear was the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Months earlier, news about Leo and Noelle would have devastated me. Now it barely stirred any emotion. They felt like characters from a television show I no longer watched. Maddie seemed to notice. "You really don't care anymore, do you?" I smiled softly. "No." And it was true. I wasn't pretending. I genuinely didn't care. While Leo and Noelle obsessed over appearances, I was building something real. A meaningful career. A peaceful home. A future based on self-respect rather than validation. As the wedding date approached, the excitement surrounding the event reached a fever pitch. Invitations had been sent. Vendors had been paid. Luxury decorations filled the ballroom. Noelle proudly displayed her diamond ring and growing baby bump at every opportunity. Leo basked in the admiration of guests who saw only the carefully crafted image he projected. To everyone watching from the outside, it looked like a fairy tale. The handsome businessman. The beautiful young bride. The lavish wedding. The perfect future. But appearances can be deceptive. And sometimes the taller people build their illusions, the harder those illusions fall. Neither Leo nor Noelle realized it yet, but the grand wedding they had spent months planning was about to become the stage for the most humiliating night of their lives. And when the curtain finally rose, every lie, every secret, and every mistake they had buried would come crashing into the light. By the evening of the wedding, Crystal Plaza looked less like a ballroom and more like a palace built for royalty. Towering crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light. Thousands of imported orchids lined the walls. White roses overflowed from elaborate centerpieces while waiters in tailored tuxedos moved through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne. A full symphony orchestra played softly from a raised platform, creating an atmosphere of luxury so extravagant it almost felt unreal. Everything Noelle had dreamed of was finally happening. Guests filled the ballroom dressed in designer gowns and custom-tailored suits. Influential business owners, socialites, investors, and executives mingled beneath the glittering lights. Conversations buzzed from every corner of the room as people admired the lavish decorations and speculated about the enormous amount of money that must have been spent to create such a spectacle. At the center of it all stood Noelle. Her custom Vera Wang gown sparkled beneath the chandeliers covered in thousands of carefully placed crystals. A diamond tiara rested on her perfectly styled hair, and she moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed she had finally reached the top of the world. One hand rested gently on her stomach, a subtle reminder to every guest that she wasn't only a bride. She was carrying Leo's future heir. At least that was the image she wanted everyone to see. Leo wasn't doing much better. Dressed in a pristine white tuxedo jacket, he walked through the ballroom with an unmistakable air of superiority. Every smile, every handshake, every conversation seemed designed to reinforce the same message. Look at me. I won. I got the beautiful young wife. I got the family. I got the future. To anyone watching from a distance, they looked like the perfect couple. Successful. Wealthy. Intouchable. Neither of them realized that their carefully constructed fantasy was only minutes away from collapsing. Toward the back of the ballroom sat an unexpected guest. Uncle Bruce. My late grandmother's longtime friend. A large man with a booming voice, endless stories, and absolutely no understanding of volume control. After several glasses of champagne, Bruce was doing what Bruce always did best. Talking. Loudly. Very loudly. The group of businessmen seated around him listened with amused smiles as he launched into yet another story from his recent travels. I just got back from Oregon last week, he announced proudly. Several guests turned toward him. Oregon, one man asked. Bruce nodded enthusiastically. Beautiful place. I was visiting my son and stopped by a little town called Oak Haven. The name immediately caught Leo's attention. He had been greeting guests at a nearby table when he heard it. Oak Haven. The place where Arya had moved after the divorce. Without realizing it, he slowed his pace. Noelle, standing beside him, noticed the change. What is it? She whispered. Leo didn't answer. His attention had already shifted toward Bruce's conversation. The older man continued speaking. And while I was there, I ran into Arya. Several people around the table leaned forward. Leo's ex-wife, someone asked. The very same, Bruce replied. A smile spread across his face. Let me tell you something. That girl looks absolutely incredible. Leo froze. Bruce had no idea who was listening. No idea that the groom himself stood only a few feet away. Honestly, Bruce continued, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked healthier, happier, and more confident than I've ever seen her. More guests began paying attention. Nearby, conversations gradually quieted. Bruce didn't notice. He was far too busy telling his story. She's living in her grandmother's beautiful coastal estate now, he said. You should see that place. Gorgeous craftsman house overlooking the coastline. Massive gardens. Roses everywhere. It looks like something straight out of a movie. A few guests exchanged curious glances. The story was becoming increasingly interesting, especially because most people only knew Arya as Leo's quiet ex-wife. Bruce laughed. That girl is thriving. She's working for one of the most respected design firms in Oregon. Apparently, she's leading major commercial projects already. One businessman raised an eyebrow. Really? Oh, absolutely. Bruce took another sip of champagne. She's talented as hell. Leo felt his stomach tighten. For years, he had dismissed Arya's career as insignificant. For years, he had treated her accomplishments like hobbies. Now dozens of people were hearing a very different version of the story. But Bruce wasn't finished. Not even close. One of the guests smiled. Sounds like she's doing pretty well for herself. Bruce burst out laughing. Doing well, that's putting it mildly. Something in his tone immediately grabbed everyone's attention. What do you mean? Another guest asked. Bruce lowered his voice slightly. Unfortunately, even his whisper was louder than most people's normal speaking voice. Let's just say her salary isn't exactly what she's living on. Several people frowned. What are you talking about? Bruce leaned back in his chair. Arya's grandmother absolutely adored her. When she passed away, she didn't just leave Arya the house. A brief silence followed. Then Bruce delivered the sentence that changed everything. She left her a trust fund worth several $1 million. The words seemed to echo through the ballroom. For a moment, nobody spoke. Several guests stared at him in disbelief. Then the questions started. Several million. Seriously. You're kidding. Bruce shook his head. Nope. She's practically a millionaire. The house alone is worth a fortune. Add the trust fund and investments and she's set for life. The table erupted with surprise. Nearby guests overheard. Then they told other guests. Within minutes, whispers began spreading across the ballroom, like a ripple moving across water. Arya is wealthy. Arya inherited millions. Leo divorced a millionaire. Did he know? How could he not know? The gossip spread faster than wildfire. Guests turned toward one another. Phones appeared. Conversations intensified. Everywhere people looked, the same topic dominated the room. Meanwhile, Leo stood completely motionless. The color slowly drained from his face. His heart pounded violently against his chest. He remembered every argument, every insult, every moment he had dismissed Arya, every time he had treated her as ordinary. And now, standing in the middle of his own wedding reception, he was discovering that the woman he had thrown away possessed everything he valued most: beauty, loyalty, success, and wealth beyond anything he had imagined. Beside him, Noelle looked equally stunned. Her smile had completely vanished. For months, she had viewed Arya as the loser, the abandoned ex-wife, the woman she had replaced. Now, for the first time, she realized the truth. Arya had never lost. She had simply walked away. The whispers continued, growing louder. Guests openly discussed the revelation. Some laughed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Several people glanced toward Leo with expressions that bordered on pity. That hurt more than anything, because Leo understood exactly what they were thinking. The groom who believed he had upgraded his life. The man who abandoned a loyal wife for a younger woman. The husband who thought he had won had actually thrown away a fortune. And the entire ballroom knew it. Standing beneath the crystal chandeliers, surrounded by luxury, applause, and celebration, Leo felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Regret. Pure. Crushing. Regret. And as the rumors continued spreading from table to table, he realized with growing horror that this wasn't just an embarrassing story. It was the beginning of a disaster that was about to destroy everything. The ballroom was still filled with music. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead. Guests were still holding champagne glasses and smiling for photographs. Yet for Leo, the world had abruptly stopped turning. The laughter around him sounded distant. The orchestra seemed to fade into the background. Even the bright lights suddenly felt dim. All he could hear were the words that continued echoing inside his head. A trust fund worth several $1 million. She's thriving. She's happier than ever. She's leading major projects. Every sentence felt like a hammer striking the walls of a carefully constructed illusion. For years, Leo had convinced himself that leaving Arya had been the right decision. He told himself she was boring, predictable, too comfortable, too ordinary. Noelle had been exciting. Young, adventurous, ambitious. At least that was what he had believed. But standing in the middle of his wedding reception, surrounded by hundreds of guests, he suddenly saw the truth with painful clarity. Arya had never been ordinary. She had been extraordinary. And he had been too blind to appreciate it. His fingers tightened around his champagne flute. A strange sensation settled in his chest. Regret. Not the mild regret people felt after making a poor decision. This was something deeper. Something darker. A realization that arrived too late. He couldn't stop remembering. Memory after memory began flooding his mind. Arya staying up until 2 a.m, helping him prepare presentations when he was struggling to build his business. Arya encouraging him after failed projects. Arya supporting him financially during difficult periods. Arya celebrating every promotion, every contract, every success as if it were her own achievement. She had believed in him long before anyone else did. She had stood beside him when he had nothing. Back then, there were no luxury apartments, no expensive cars, no prestigious clients, no designer suits. There was only Arya, and she had never complained. Not once. A painful knot formed in his throat, because another memory quickly followed. Noelle. Noelle complaining about restaurants. Noelle demanding expensive gifts. Noelle obsessing over social media followers. Noelle constantly comparing herself to other women. Noelle measuring every relationship in terms of money and status. For the first time, Leo wasn't comparing two women. He was comparing two lives. One built on loyalty, the other built on appearances. And suddenly the difference was impossible to ignore. Across the ballroom, Noelle was still smiling for guests, still posing for photographs, still touching her stomach every few minutes to remind everyone she was carrying his child. Only now Leo couldn't look at her the same way. The admiration he once felt was gone. In its place was uncertainty, doubt, suspicion. Had she ever truly loved him? Or had she simply loved what he could provide? The question hit him harder than he expected, because deep down he already knew the answer. His hand began trembling. He quickly lowered his champagne glass before anyone noticed. Unfortunately, people were already noticing. The whispers continued spreading throughout the ballroom. Guests glanced toward him. Some looked surprised. Others looked amused. A few looked genuinely sympathetic. That sympathy hurt more than ridicule ever could. Leo understood exactly what they were thinking. There goes the fool. The man who threw away a loyal wife. The man who abandoned a successful woman. The man who walked away from millions. The man who traded a diamond for glass. His stomach twisted violently. He suddenly felt hot despite the cool, air-conditioned ballroom. Sweat formed along the back of his neck. The room seemed smaller. The walls felt closer. The conversations around him grew louder. Every laugh sounded like mockery. Every whisper sounded like judgment. Every glance felt like a knife. For years, Leo had built his identity around success. He needed people to admire him, to respect him, to envy him. Now, in a single evening, that image was crumbling. And everyone was watching it happen. His breathing became uneven. He loosened his collar. The expensive tuxedo suddenly felt suffocating. Across the room, he noticed several businessmen whispering to one another while occasionally looking in his direction. One of them shook his head. Another laughed. Leo looked away immediately. His chest tightened. He imagined the stories that would spread tomorrow. At country clubs, corporate meetings, private dinners, the groom who abandoned a millionaire, the executive who left the wrong woman, the fool who thought he had upgraded his life. Humiliation burned through him like acid. Then came the most painful realization of all. Arya had never told him about the inheritance. Not because she was hiding it. Because it had never mattered to her. She never measured people by money. Never used wealth to control anyone. Never bragged. Never showed off. The exact opposite of Noel. The exact opposite of the spectacle surrounding him tonight. Leo remembered the countless times Arya had encouraged him to slow down and appreciate what they already had. The quiet dinners. The weekend trips. The evenings spent simply talking. Back then he had considered those moments boring. Now they felt priceless. A lump formed in his throat. He swallowed hard. Too late. Everything was too late. Arya was gone. Not physically. Emotionally. Mentally. Completely. He suddenly remembered the final dinner before their divorce. The calm expression on her face. The absence of anger. The absence of tears. At the time, he thought it meant she would never truly leave. That eventually she would regret her decision. That she would miss him. Now he understood. That wasn't sadness. It was closure. She had already let him go. Long before he realized what he was losing. His hand shook harder. The champagne inside the glass rippled visibly. A nearby guest noticed. "Leo, are you all right?" The question snapped him back to reality. He forced a smile. "Fine." But his voice sounded strange. Thin. Unsteady. The guest walked away unconvinced. Leo barely noticed. His thoughts were spiraling. Images collided inside his head. Arya laughing in their first apartment. Arya helping him through difficult years. Arya standing beside him at every milestone. Arya smiling in the Oregon sunshine free from him. The contrast was unbearable. For the first time since meeting Noel, he allowed himself to consider a terrifying possibility. What if losing Arya wasn't a mistake? What if it was the greatest mistake of his entire life? The answer arrived immediately. It was. And that realization shattered something inside him. His vision blurred. His pulse pounded in his ears. The whispers grew louder. The room seemed to spin. The image he had spent years building was collapsing around him. And worst of all, he couldn't stop it. Because the truth was no longer hidden. The truth stood in the center of the ballroom for everyone to see. Arya had moved on. Arya had succeeded. Arya had become everything he once claimed she never could be. And Leo stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of his own wedding, surrounded by luxury applause, and hundreds of witnesses finally understanding the full cost of his betrayal. He hadn't won. He had lost everything. And the realization was slowly driving him insane. Dưới đây là phần cao trào lớn nhất của câu chuyện được viết theo phong cách YouTube Story. với nhịp độ nhanh, cảm xúc mạnh và nhiều tình tiết liên tiếp để giữ chân người xem. For several long seconds, the ballroom remained completely silent. The tension between Leo and Noelle hung in the air like a storm cloud moments before a lightning strike. Hundreds of guests watched without blinking. No one cared about the orchestra anymore. No one cared about the flowers. No one cared about the wedding. The spectacle unfolding in front of them was far more entertaining. Leo stood frozen, staring at Noelle as if he were seeing her for the very first time. The woman he had sacrificed everything for. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for. The woman he had chosen over Arya. And now, standing in the middle of their lavish reception, he was beginning to realize that everything he thought he knew about her might have been a lie. Noelle attempted a nervous smile. "Leo, sweetheart, please. Let's go somewhere private." Her voice trembled. For once, she wasn't performing for the guests. She was scared. Genuinely scared. Leo's eyes narrowed. "Private," he repeated. The word sounded almost ridiculous. "You didn't mind talking about me in public at the bank." Several guests gasped. Noelle's face drained of color. "That's not what happened." "Then tell me what happened." His voice was louder now. Sharper. The ballroom grew even quieter. People stopped pretending not to listen. Cell phones slowly began appearing above tables. Someone hit record. Then another. And another. Within seconds, dozens of guests were filming, instinctively sensing that something unforgettable was about to happen. Noelle noticed. Panic flashed across her face. "Leo, please." But Leo was no longer listening. Months of frustration, humiliation, jealousy, regret, and wounded pride had finally reached a breaking point. His hand tightened around the stem of his champagne glass. The crystal trembled violently. "You used me." The accusation echoed through the ballroom. "No. You used me," he shouted. The force of his voice startled everyone. Noelle took a step backward. Leo's entire body was shaking. His face was red. His eyes bloodshot. He looked less like a groom and more like a man on the edge of collapse. Then it happened. Crack. The sound cut through the ballroom like a gunshot. Leo squeezed the champagne glass so hard that it shattered inside his hand. Several women screamed. Jagged pieces of crystal sliced into his palm. Blood immediately began dripping onto the white marble floor. For a moment, everyone stared in stunned silence. Red droplets splashed across the expensive carpet. Leo looked down at his bleeding hand, then slowly looked back up at Noelle. Something inside him had snapped. Completely. Noelle stared at the blood. "Oh my God, Leo. Shut up." His roar echoed across the ballroom. The orchestra stopped playing. Guests flinched. Even the waitstaff froze. Years of carefully maintained appearances vanished in an instant. The successful businessman, the polished executive, the confident groom, gone. Only rage remained. Pure, uncontrollable rage. "You ruined my life." Noelle's eyes widened. "I ruined your life." She pointed at herself in disbelief. "You left your wife for me. You manipulated me. You wanted to leave her anyway." The argument exploded. Years of lies suddenly surfaced all at once. Every insult grew louder. Every accusation more vicious. Neither of them cared that hundreds of people were watching. Neither of them cared that cameras were recording everything. They only cared about hurting each other. And then Leo completely lost control. With a furious sweep of his arm, he smashed into the towering champagne display positioned near the dance floor. The entire structure collapsed. Hundreds of champagne glasses crashed to the ground. Glass shattered everywhere. Champagne sprayed across guests' dresses and tuxedos. People screamed and jumped backward. The sound was deafening. Chaos erupted instantly. Leo, his father, shouted, "What are you doing?" But Leo wasn't listening. He marched toward one of the catering tables. Guests scrambled out of his path. Before anyone could stop him, he grabbed the edge of the tablecloth and pulled. Hard. The table flipped. Platters of lobster, oysters, caviar, and expensive hors d'oeuvres flew through the air. Food crashed onto the floor. Champagne bottles exploded. Silver serving trays scattered across the ballroom. The crowd erupted into panic. Some guests rushed toward the exits. Others continued filming. Most simply stood frozen, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Noelle looked around in horror. This can't be happening. But it was. And it was getting worse. Much worse. Leo pointed at her with his bleeding hand. "Tell them." His voice cracked. "Tell everyone why you really married me." The ballroom went silent again. Noelle's breathing became uneven. "Stop it." No. His scream echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Tell them. People exchanged nervous glances. The atmosphere felt dangerous. Unpredictable. Noelle's sweet bride persona finally disappeared. Completely. Her expression hardened. The mask fell away. And for the first time, everyone saw the real Noelle. You want the truth, she snapped. The crowd collectively held its breath. You weren't exactly a prize yourself. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Leo stared at her. Shocked. Noelle laughed bitterly. You acted rich. You acted successful. You acted like you could give me everything. The words hit like bullets. And look at you now. The humiliation on Leo's face was unbearable. Guests stared openly. Some looked horrified. Others fascinated. No one wanted to leave anymore. The wedding had transformed into a public disaster, a reality show unfolding live. Then came the subject neither of them wanted to discuss. The baby. Leo pointed toward Noelle's stomach, his hand shaking violently. What about the baby? The room froze. Noelle's expression changed instantly. What about it? Is that real? Several guests audibly gasped. Even the air seemed to disappear from the room. Noelle looked stunned, then furious. You are insane. Answer me. The argument spiraled further. Voices rose. Accusation flew. The pressure finally became too much. Noelle attempted to step away. Leo reached toward her. She stumbled backward. Her high heels slipped against the polished floor. And suddenly, she fell. A collective scream erupted from the crowd. Noelle crashed against the corner of a decorative ice sculpture display before collapsing onto the floor. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Noelle clutched her stomach. Her face pale, her expression twisted with pain. Then she screamed. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Several guests rushed forward. Others backed away. Panic spread rapidly. Leo stared down at her, frozen, blood dripping from his hand, his chest heaving, his entire world collapsing around him. Meanwhile, dozens of phones continued recording. Every second, every scream, every accusation, every act of destruction. Videos were already being uploaded before the reception had even ended. Social media exploded. Guests texted friends, shared footage, posted clips online. The disaster spread beyond Crystal Plaza in real time. Back inside the ballroom, Leo's parents looked devastated. His mother was crying. His father buried his face in his hands. Noel's parents looked equally horrified. Years of pride, status, reputation, destroyed in a single evening. Then came the final act, the wedding cake, a 7-tier masterpiece standing near the center of the ballroom. Hours of work, thousands of dollars. The symbol of everything this wedding was supposed to be. Leo stared at it, then slowly walked toward it. Several guests instinctively moved aside. No one dared stop him. With a furious roar, he grabbed the table and flipped it. The enormous cake crashed onto the floor. Frosting exploded everywhere. Flowers scattered. Guests screamed and jumped back. The ballroom looked like a battlefield. Broken glass, spilled alcohol, destroyed decorations, food covering the floor, people rushing toward exits, security running in, family members crying, phones recording. The wedding of the century had become the disaster of the century. Standing in the middle of the wreckage, Leo looked around. His tuxedo stained with blood. His reputation destroyed. His marriage shattered before it had even begun. Everything he had sacrificed for lay in ruins around him. And for the first time, he understood the truth. The life he thought he had won was nothing more than an illusion that had just collapsed in front of hundreds of witnesses. As security approached and guests fled the ballroom, the only thing left behind was chaos. And the certainty that this wedding would be remembered forever. Not as a celebration, but as one of the most spectacular public meltdowns anyone had ever witnessed. While the internet feasted on videos of the wedding disaster, the real destruction didn't happen inside Crystal Plaza. It happened afterward. Long after the guests went home. Long after the shattered glass had been swept away. Long after the orchestra packed up and left. The true collapse began in the parking garage beneath the hotel. The moment there was no audience left to impress. No cameras to pose for. No illusion to maintain. Only Leo and Noelle. And the ugly truth between them. Several guests who had left the ballroom later described hearing screams echoing through the concrete structure. The argument that had begun during the reception exploded into something far worse once they were alone. Noelle stood beside a luxury SUV, her wedding dress stained with champagne, frosting, and dirt. The sparkling bride, who had spent months planning her perfect fairy tale, now looked disheveled and furious. Leo wasn't much better. His tuxedo was covered in blood from his injured hand. His face looked pale and exhausted. Every trace of confidence had disappeared. For several moments they simply stared at one another. Then Noelle spoke first. "You ruined everything." Her voice shook with rage. Leo laughed. Not a normal laugh. A bitter, hollow sound. "I ruined everything. You humiliated me in front of everyone." She pointed toward the hotel above them. "That was supposed to be my wedding." "Your wedding," Leo snapped. "My wedding, my money, my reputation, my career, what exactly belongs to me anymore?" Noelle folded her arms. "You should have thought about that before acting like a lunatic." The words hit a nerve. For a second, Leo looked as if he might explode again. Then Noelle delivered the final blow. "You know what your problem is," she said coldly. "You thought you were richer than you actually are." The silence that followed felt deadly. Leo stared at her. Slowly, dangerously. "What did you just say?" Noelle wasn't afraid anymore. The mask had finally fallen away. There was no point pretending. Not now. Not after everything had collapsed. She laughed. A cruel, mocking laugh. "The truth." Her voice dripped with contempt. "I thought I was marrying a successful executive." She stepped closer. "Instead, I got a man drowning in debt." Every word landed like a punch. "You borrowed money. You begged vendors for extensions. You couldn't even cover the wedding expenses yourself." Leo's face twisted with fury. Noelle wasn't finished. "My parents had to help pay for this disaster." The confession stunned even Leo. "What?" Noelle rolled her eyes. "You heard me. My parents helped. You think all of this came from you?" She gestured toward the hotel. "The venue. The flowers. The orchestra. The dress. You couldn't afford half of it." For several seconds, Leo simply stood there. Speechless. The humiliation was complete. The successful businessman image he had spent years creating wasn't just cracked. It had been obliterated. Then Noelle delivered another demand. One that revealed exactly who she was. "If we're staying together," she said, "I want financial protection." Leo frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I want the condo." His eyes widened. "The condo. And cash." Noelle didn't hesitate. A lot of cash. The request felt absurd. Their wedding had literally collapsed less than an hour earlier. Yet she was already negotiating assets. Leo stared at her, finally seeing what everyone else had seen all along. A transaction. Not a relationship. A deal. Not love. Then came the most disturbing moment of all. Noelle placed a hand on her stomach. The gesture instantly caught Leo's attention. Her eyes narrowed. "You should think carefully about what happens next." A chill ran through him. "What are you talking about?" Noelle's voice became cold. "If you don't take care of me, maybe I stop taking care of your future." For a moment, Leo didn't understand. Then he did. The baby. She was using the baby. As leverage. As a bargaining chip. The realization made him physically sick. Every warning people had given him suddenly made sense. Every red flag. Every suspicious moment. Every uncomfortable feeling he had ignored. He looked at her stomach, then looked back at her, and for the first time a terrifying thought entered his mind. What if there wasn't a baby at all? The possibility hit him like lightning. The timing, the pressure to marry quickly, the constant manipulation, the emotional blackmail. Had he been trapped? Noelle saw the suspicion in his eyes immediately. Her expression hardened. "Don't even think it." But the damage was done. Trust was gone. Completely. Whatever remained of their relationship died in that parking garage. Leo turned away. "No." Noelle blinked. "What?" "No condo. No money. No more." She stared at him in disbelief. Then fury exploded across her face. "You owe me." Leo laughed again. That same hollow, broken laugh. "No." He shook his head. "I don't owe you anything." Without another word, he walked toward his car. Noelle screamed after him. Threats. Insults. Demons. None of it mattered anymore. Leo got into the vehicle and drove away, leaving her standing alone in the parking garage. The marriage hadn't even survived a single night. Unfortunately for both of them, the consequences were only beginning. Within 24 hours, videos from the reception flooded social media. Millions of views appeared almost instantly. The footage was impossible to ignore. The screaming, the broken champagne tower, the destroyed wedding cake, the public meltdown. Everyone saw it. Potential clients, business partners, investors, competitors, and they all reached the same conclusion. Leo was unstable. Calls stopped coming. Contracts disappeared. Meetings were canceled. Several major clients quietly ended their relationships with his company. The damage spread rapidly. Without new business, revenue collapsed. Without revenue, employees left. Without employees, projects stalled. Within months, the company that Leo had spent years building was drowning. Debt piled up. Lawsuits followed. Creditors began calling daily. Eventually, bankruptcy became unavoidable. The empire he had sacrificed his marriage for crumbled into dust. Noelle's situation wasn't much better. The wedding videos had made her infamous. People recognized her everywhere. Former friends distanced themselves. Employers avoided her. Social circles closed their doors. Rumors about her behavior spread through the city. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had become the face of greed and manipulation. The glamorous future she had envisioned vanished almost overnight. And through all of it, Arya remained completely removed from the chaos. Miles away in Oregon, she continued working on the Eco Lodge project. She planted flowers, read books, designed beautiful spaces, built a life based on honesty and purpose. While Leo and Noelle spent their days blaming one another for their downfall, Arya never looked back. Because the greatest revenge wasn't watching them fail. It was no longer caring. In the end, greed destroyed what betrayal had started. Leo and Noel had spent so much time chasing money, status, and appearances that they never noticed they were destroying themselves. By the time they finally understood the cost, there was nothing left to save. Only ruins. And the bitter realization that they had created those ruins with their own hands. While Leo and Noel continued sinking deeper into the consequences of their choices, Arya's life moved in the opposite direction. She never followed the gossip. She never searched for updates. She never asked questions. The drama that had once consumed her life now felt like a distant storm on the horizon, something she could see from afar but no longer feared. Instead, her attention remained focused on the life she was building in Oakhaven. And that life was flourishing. Months after joining Foreman and Soul, the Eco Lodge project finally reached completion. What had begun as a collection of sketches, blueprints, and design concepts had transformed into a breathtaking retreat nestled among Oregon's coastal forests. Warm cedar walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, handcrafted furnishings, and carefully curated natural materials created an atmosphere that felt both luxurious and deeply connected to nature. The grand opening exceeded everyone's expectations. Guests traveled from across the country to experience the property. Travel magazines featured glowing reviews. Social media influencers praised the design. Investors were thrilled. Most importantly, the client was ecstatic. During the final presentation, Arya stood beside Matt as the investors toured the completed lodge. Every detail she had envisioned months earlier now existed in reality. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself. Not because someone else approved of her, not because she was trying to prove anything, but because she had created something beautiful, something meaningful, something entirely her own. After the presentation, one of the lead investors approached her with a smile. "This project has soul," he said. "You didn't just design a building, you created an experience." The compliment stayed with her long after the meeting ended. A week later, Matt called her into his office. At first, Arya worried she had made a mistake. Instead, she found Matt grinning from ear to ear. "I've got some good news," he said. Arya laughed. Good news usually starts with that smile. Matt slid a document across the desk. The moment she looked at the number, her eyes widened. A 30% salary increase. For several seconds, she simply stared, unable to speak. "You earned it," Matt said. "The success of the Eco Lodge project opened doors for this company that we never imagined possible." Arya felt emotion rise in her chest. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Recognition, respect, validation. Things she had spent years searching for in the wrong places. When she returned home that evening, she celebrated in the simplest way possible. A cup of tea, a sunset in her garden, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had earned every bit of her success. As part of her promotion, the company also offered her additional paid vacation time. For the first time in years, she had both the freedom and confidence to travel purely for enjoyment. A month later, she rented a small convertible and drove down the California coast. The journey became one of the happiest experiences of her life. She explored charming seaside towns, watched the waves crash against the cliffs of Big Sur, visited art galleries, sampled local wines, made spontaneous stops whenever something caught her attention. There was no schedule, no pressure, no expectations, only freedom. For so long, her identity had revolved around being someone's wife. Now she was simply Arya, and that felt wonderful. When she returned to Oakhaven, she made a promise to herself. She would continue growing, not because she needed to escape her past, but because she was excited about her future. She enrolled in a pottery class. At first, she was terrible. Her bowls leaned sideways. Her mugs looked strange. Several creations collapsed completely on the wheel. But she laughed through every mistake. There was something strangely therapeutic about creating something imperfect with her own hands. Something that reminded her life didn't have to be flawless to be beautiful. She also joined a local hiking group. Every weekend, she explored trails that wound through forests, mountains, and coastal cliffs. Along the way, she met new friends, shared stories, and discovered parts of Oregon she never knew existed. Little by little, her world expanded. Not through grand dramatic events, but through small moments of joy. The kind that quietly transform a person from the inside out. Meanwhile, her grandmother's garden became more beautiful than ever. The roses grew larger. The hydrangeas bloomed brighter. New flowers appeared every season. Sometimes Arya would sit on the porch in the evening watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and pink, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender through the air. Those moments became her favorite, because they reminded her how far she had come. Eventually, something else happened. She stopped thinking about Leo entirely. Not because she forced herself to forget, because he simply no longer mattered. His name rarely crossed her mind. The pain had faded. The anger had disappeared. Even the memories had softened. They no longer felt like open wounds. Only lessons. Lessons that had shaped the woman she had become. One quiet afternoon, nearly a year after arriving in Oregon, Arya sat in her garden with a book resting in her lap. The sunlight filtered through the trees overhead. Birds sang softly nearby. Everything felt peaceful. She looked around at the home she loved, the career she had built, the friendships she had formed, the life she had created. And suddenly a realization settled gently into her heart. The divorce had never been the end of her story. It had only felt that way at the time. In reality, it had been a beginning, a doorway, a second chance. Losing Leo hadn't ruined her future. It had given her one. She smiled as the evening sun illuminated the garden. For years, she believed happiness came from finding the right person. Now she understood something much more important. Happiness came from becoming the right person for herself. The woman who had once sat across from her unfaithful husband at a cold farewell dinner felt like someone from another lifetime. That version of Arya had been broken, lost, afraid. This version was strong, independent, confident, and genuinely happy. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, Arya closed her book and took a deep breath. The future stretched before her like an open road, full of possibilities, full of adventure, full of hope. And for the first time in a very long time, she couldn't wait to see where it would lead. Because sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin immediately after the chapters we thought would destroy us. And Arya's story was only just beginning.